Hey everyone, and welcome to your deep dive for today.
Ooh, I like that your deep dive.
Yeah, it's for you. It's personalized.
Well,
So today we're going to be looking at sadness and nostalgia, and we've got some really interesting excerpts to get to, like um, from academic texts, psychology studies, even some literary examples.
really? Literary examples too.
Yeah.
Ah,
So, you might be thinking, sadness, nostalgia, those don't sound like the most fun things to think about,
yeah.
but trust me, these feelings are way more complex and maybe even more valuable than we tend to give them credit for.
I'm intrigued already.
Okay, so we've got some great sources lined up. We've got The Moral Psychology of Sadness, which is
Yeah.
a pretty fascinating book. And then we've got some really cool research on how long emotions last. Like how long does sadness actually stick around?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, Verdine and Lavrieson
Okay.
did a study on that.
I can't wait to hear about that.
And then we've even got some philosophical analysis of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility.
It'll be very cool.
And to round things out, we'll be diving into grief and recovery.
Wow, that's quite a mix.
I know, right? It's going to be good. So today, our mission, if you will, is to understand how sadness works, how it connects to nostalgia, and why these so-called negative emotions might have more to offer us than we realize.
I love that framing, so-called negative emotions.
Yeah, exactly. So let's jump right in with the nature of sadness itself. The editor of The Moral Psychology of Sadness makes this really compelling point. He says that sadness, unlike emotions like anger or fear or happiness, has been relatively unexplored in philosophy.
It's true. We tend to focus on the more, I guess, positive or maybe even like flashy emotions.
Yeah, it's like we've been ignoring this whole continent on the map of emotions.
That's a great way to put it.
And here's where things get really, really interesting. A study by Verdun and Lavrieson found that sadness sticks around for a lot longer than other emotions.
Really? Like, how long are we talking?
On average, about 120 hours.
Wow, that's 5 days.
Yeah, 5 whole days. That's a long time.
That is,
So the researchers think it's because sadness is tied to this thing called rumination. That tendency to really get in there and think about stuff.
yeah, like really overthink things.
Exactly. Like you just can't shake that feeling of sadness. It could be because it's forcing us to slow down and really consider what's important to us.
So maybe instead of always trying to snap out of it, we should look at sadness as like an invitation to reflect.
Yeah, to process things.
Like sadness is saying, hey, I'm here for a reason. Let's figure this out.
Exactly. It makes you wonder if we've been doing sadness all wrong.
Right. And this actually connects to a really interesting philosophical debate about sadness and, the end of the world.
Oh, wow.
It's often called the doomsday scenario.
Okay, I'm listening.
So imagine like humanity is on the verge of extinction. What would that feel like?
Oh, man. That's heavy.
Right. So philosopher Samuel Scheffler argued that the idea of humanity ending makes us sad because we care so much about the future.
That makes sense. Like we're invested in what's to come. Yeah. But Christine of Toronto comes in and challenges this. She's like, hold on. Just because the idea makes us sad now doesn't mean we'd actually be unhappy if it happened.
Oh, that's interesting. So are we saying that we're bad at predicting our own feelings?
Well, psychological research suggests that we might be. We're often way off in predicting how we'll actually feel in those hypothetical situations.
It's like we have this idea of how we'll react, but then when we're actually faced with it, it's completely different.
Right. It's like people who say they'd be devastated if they lost a loved one.
Yeah.
But then they find incredible strength when they actually go through it.
That's a good point. We're more resilient than we think.
Maybe. And this reminds me of Andrea Westland's work in Untold Sorrow. She really emphasizes the communication aspect of grief. Like, expressing sadness isn't just about wallowing, it's about connecting with others.
I like that. It's about reaching out.
Yeah, sharing our experience so we can find comfort and understanding.
And maybe even build stronger bonds with people who get it.
Exactly. So sadness isn't just this thing we feel inside. It has this social element that can help us connect with others.
That makes a lot of sense. And it actually leads us perfectly into our next section, how sadness shows up in love and relationships.
Oh, this is where it gets juicy. We're going to be looking at Jamie Lindemann Nelson's work on sadness, sense, and sensibility.
Sense and Sensibility, like the Jane Austen novel.
The one and only.
Okay, this should be good.
Yeah, so Nelson focuses on how we experience sadness in romantic relationships.
Interesting. So how does that tie into Sense and Sensibility?
Well, she uses the novel to show how the way we experience sadness actually reveals something about our values and how we relate to others.
I see.
Like, think about Eleanor and Marianne, the two main sisters. They have totally different ways of dealing with love and loss.
Yeah, one's all like, keep calm and carry on, and the other one's like, let me feel all the feelings.
Exactly. Eleanor keeps her sadness bottled up, while Marianne is like a waterfall of emotion.
Oh, I know some people like that.
Right, so it makes you think, is there ever a time when expressing our emotions openly, like Marianne does, is actually helpful?
That's a good question. It definitely can be messy, but maybe sometimes that's what's needed.
Yeah. Nelson does argue that Marianne's unrestrained sadness ends up hurting her and others.
Okay, so maybe there's a balance.
Right, we need to acknowledge our emotions authentically, but also manage how we express them.
It's like a delicate dance between our inner world and how we interact with others.
I like that, a delicate dance.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of navigating relationships, we also have Ryan and Erica Preston Roeder's work on grief and recovery.
Okay.
This one's super interesting because they actually argue that quickly bouncing back from grief doesn't necessarily mean the relationship was shallow.
Oh, that's counterintuitive. I like it.
Right. Instead of judging people's grieving process, they highlight the impact of love and connection even after death.
So it's more about the lasting impression that love leaves.
Yeah. Like the deceased loved one continues to shape the survivor's character even after they're gone.
That's beautiful.
It is. It's not about getting over it. It's about carrying that love with you in a way that honors the relationship.
It allows you to move forward.
Exactly. Which brings us to this question. How does nostalgia fit into all of this?
Ooh, good question. Is it just about yearning for the past, or is there something more to it?
I guess we'll find out because that's what we'll be diving into next time.
I can't wait.
Be sure to join us as we explore nostalgia and its connection to sadness and what it can reveal about ourselves.
Sounds fascinating.
It will be. See you then.
Okay.
Bye. Bye. Okay, so we just left off talking about grief and relationships. And now we're moving into nostalgia. I'm curious, how does this emotion connect to sadness?
Nostalgia is often seen as like a sad tinged emotion. Yeah. Like a longing for a past that's gone.
Yeah, I love that you use the phrase sad tinged. It really captures that bittersweet feeling, like an ache for something you can't quite grasp anymore.
Exactly. And Felipe de Brigard, in his chapter on nostalgia and mental simulation, argues that nostalgia isn't just about yearning for the past. He suggests it actually involves like actively reconstructing the past in our minds.
So instead of just passively remembering, we're actually re-experiencing those past moments, even if it's just a mental exercise.
Right. It's like we're creating a mental movie of past events. And this mental simulation is linked to the brain's default network, which is also involved in like self-reflection and daydreaming and envisioning the future.
Wow. So nostalgia is giving our brains a workout by like weaving together these threads of memory and imagination.
Pretty much. And what's even more fascinating is how our understanding of nostalgia has changed over time.
Oh, how so?
Well, it used to be seen as a purely negative emotion, like something to be avoided. But now researchers are recognizing its bittersweet nature and even its potential benefits.
Yeah, I read that nostalgia can actually boost our mood, increase self-esteem, and even strengthen social bonds.
Exactly. It seems that by connecting us to these positive memories and a sense of belonging, nostalgia can act as a really powerful coping mechanism, especially during times of stress or loneliness.
It's like nostalgia gives us this sense of comfort and continuity, right? Connecting us to our past selves and who we are today.
Absolutely. But nostalgia isn't always about those happy memories, is it?
That's true. It can definitely be tied to more challenging or difficult experiences.
Yeah, Anna Gottlieb's work on exile nostalgias offers a really interesting perspective on this.
Exile nostalgias.
So she studied the experiences of intellectuals who felt like spiritual exiles from the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And their nostalgia was this unique blend of sadness for a lost homeland and this longing for a different way of life.
Wow. So their nostalgia was rooted in this sense of displacement, of not belonging. That must have been incredibly difficult to process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that Gottlieb actually makes a distinction between two types of nostalgia.
Oh, really? What are they?
She calls them dissident nostalgia and aesthetic nostalgia.
Okay, I'm not familiar with those terms. Could you explain?
So think about those times when you feel nostalgic for a place or time that maybe wasn't so great for everyone, you know? Gottlieb calls that dissident nostalgia. It's like challenging the dominant narrative or the accepted view of the past.
Oh.
On the other hand, aesthetic nostalgia is more about creating new meaning from those fragments of memory.
Oh, I see. So dissident nostalgia is like saying, hey, this isn't the whole story. And aesthetic nostalgia is taking those pieces of the past and making something beautiful and meaningful out of them.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming your own narrative, even if it's been disrupted or fragmented.
And that process of creating new meaning from our experiences, even the painful ones, can be really empowering.
It's about taking ownership of your story, regardless of the challenges or disruptions you may have faced. And that's the beauty of nostalgia. It allows us to revisit the past, not to dwell in sadness or longing, but to reframe our experiences, find new perspectives, and ultimately create a more resilient sense of self.
That's a really powerful way to look at it. It makes me think about how my own experiences with nostalgia might be shaping who I am today.
It reminds us that even in those moments of sadness and longing, there's potential for creativity and growth. And by embracing those feelings, we might just discover something new about ourselves.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the nature of sadness and its impact on relationships, to the complexities of nostalgia and its potential for growth. What stands out to you as the most significant takeaway from all of this?
I think for me, it's realizing that sadness and nostalgia aren't weaknesses.
Yeah.
They can actually be sources of strength and growth.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our perspective on these emotions, seeing them not as something to fear or avoid, but as opportunities for deeper understanding and connection.
Yeah, it's like we can learn to ride the waves of those emotions and maybe even discover new shores along the way.
I love that analogy. It really speaks to that idea of empowerment that we've been talking about today.
It really is about embracing the whole human experience,
Right.
even the parts that make us uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And speaking of embracing experiences, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Ooh, a final thought.
Yeah. So if sadness and nostalgia can be sources of creativity and growth, how might you reframe your own experiences with these emotions?
That's such a great question. It really challenges us to look at these feelings in a new light. Maybe that twinge of sadness you feel when you think about a past love is actually a reminder of how deeply you're capable of loving.
Or what about that wave of nostalgia you get for your childhood home? Maybe it's actually sparking your creativity in ways you haven't even realized.
I love that. Have you ever thought about your experiences with sadness and nostalgia in that way?
It really is a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about all the incredible art and music and literature that's been inspired by those feelings of sadness and longing.
Right. Would we have those masterpieces if those artists hadn't allowed themselves to feel those difficult emotions?
It's a powerful thought.
It really is.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into sadness and nostalgia, I want to encourage you all to keep exploring these ideas. Maybe revisit some of the sources we mentioned, or even just take some time to reflect on how these emotions show up in your own life.
It's an amazing journey of self-discovery, and it can lead to a much richer understanding of who we are.
Beautifully said. So until next time, keep diving deep, and remember, those so-called negative emotions might just be your greatest teachers.